So my group did the nervous system development. First, we'll start off with prenatal development. Neurulation is the process in which the embryonic nervous system is formed. Neural plate thickens and develops into the neural tube between weeks 3 and 4.5. This structure will form the adult central nervous system. Primary brain vessels form the procephalon, also known as the forebrain, mesencephalon, or the midbrain, and rhobencephalon, also known as the hindbrain, all develop in the 5th week. From there, they develop into the secondary brain vessels of the telecephalon, diencephalon, mesencephalon, metencephalon, and myelencephalon. This occurs in week 7. From the secondary brain vessels, the brain divides up into its functioning parts. So the triencephalon becomes your cerebrum, your diencephalon forms your thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. Your mesencephalon becomes your midbrain. Your metencephalon becomes your pons and your cerebrum. The myelencephalon becomes your medulla oblongata. You can also see after week 11, the cerebrum starts to expand and fold over the diencephalon. Hemispheres of the brain, vesicles, and cerebral fluid are later developed and differentiated. So there are genetic factors that will influence the nervous system structure. So they'll help determine the neural development process as well as cause the neurons to specialize and determine which regions will be myelinated. There are also extrinsic factors that can play a role in the nervous system development, such as exposure to nicotine, alcohol, teratogens, and fetal malnutrition can all play a negative role in the development of the nervous system. For example, if a woman consumes alcohol while pregnant, the child can end up with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, FASD. The severity of FASD does vary greatly between child to child. Next, we'll talk about the neural development. The nervous system arises from the embryonic ectoderm via neural tube formation. The majority of neurons in the central nervous system are formed where immature neurons are proliferated at a rate of 250,000 neurons per minute. This occurs in the 3rd and 4th month of gestation. Neurons of the brain migrate and then differentiate once they are in the location of the body where they will function and form connections to create the brain circuit, which has over 100 trillion synapses. Random electrical impulses are fired to strengthen the connection between neurons. As the fetus grows, the firing becomes more organized while the fetus interacts with its environment. The differentiation of neurons occurs in the 6th month of gestation. During gestation, pruning also occurs. Pruning is the cleaning up of the brain circuit to get rid of excess neurons and malformed circuits. Myelination and neuromuscular coordination also progresses at this time, and it progresses in a superior to inferior and proximal to distal direction. Myelination begins at 11 weeks of development and it originates in the spinal cord. It is essential to effective propagation of electrical impulses along the axon of the neuron. So now we'll move on to postnatal development. So at birth, the child's brain only weighs a quarter of what an adult's brain weighs. This rapidly increases due to hypertrophy of the neurons, more branching and synapse formation, and increased myelin sheath production. The spinal cord and lower brain are well developed at birth as it functions in roles that are vital to the child. For example, respiration and food intake, reflexes, and response to the environment. days after birth, the extrapyramidal tract begins to function. This is a part of the motor system network and causes involuntary actions as well as postural movements. Tracts are important for carrying signals from the brain to the spinal cord and the body. 2 to 3 weeks after birth, increased myelination of neurons of the peripheral nervous system occurs, and this continues until the child is 2 or 3 years old. Like prenatal development, in postnatal development, there is some extrinsic factors that can affect the development of the nervous system. For example, poor nutrition can reduce brain growth, and it can be permanent. Injuries to the left side of the cerebral cortex can decrease language abilities. Experiences as a child can also affect how the nervous system develops.
So now we're going to continue with postnatal development, and we can see that in the 4th to 5th month after birth, myelination of the pyramidal tract is complete and it can begin to function. Myelin sheath is basically an electrically insulating layer wrapped around the axon, which increases the speed of electric conduction. And as we can see, it's responsible for muscle and digit movement. And in the same time period, we can see some goal-directed movements, which can indicate the development of other brain structures, for example, cortex. And by goal-directed movement, we basically mean reaching in attempts to grab an object. For example, if someone attempts to grab a pencil, we would call it a goal-directed movement. After hitting 1 year of age, we can see that neurons are creating a lot of new connections, around 1,000 to 10,000. And that means by the age of 4, the brain is 80% of its adult weight. So all the new connections are adding to its weight. As we age, myelination continues and neural connections that are frequently used strengthen, and those that are not being used are weakened. PET scan can show us the activity of frontal cortex increases as the infant age, and the specialization continues into adulthood. On the other hand, MRI shows us that learning can influence nervous system development because the brain reconstructs itself, basically. And by that, we mean new connections in the areas of brain frequently used in motor development. Now we're moving on into development into adulthood and old age. So neurogenesis, or the formation of new neurons, can continue into adulthood. So we keep forming new neurons as we age. These can be seen in the subgranular zone, hippocampus, and subventricular zone. This can be really important since it can maintain cognition into adulthood and subduing the effects of neurodegeneration or adult neurogenesis. Synaptic connections are dynamic through life, which means that they won't stay the same and they're constantly changing. By learning something new or exposure to new experiences in life, as the nervous system starts to age, there's going to be slower responses due to loss of neurons, dendrites, and synapses. And we can also observe a reduction in concentration of neurotransmitters, which can basically slow down the process of sending a response from one axon to the next dendrite. Exercise can always play an important role in humans' health, and in this case, it can basically counter the effects of aging by increasing dendrite branching and by controlling neural metabolism, which can eventually lead to increased cognitive function. So basically, throughout life, the neuron connections that we use more often become stronger and stronger, and those that are not being used frequently become weak. Alright, now we're going to talk about the congenital malformation and diseases. The first disease that we're going to talk about is called anencephaly, which basically means a severe congenital condition in which a large part of the skull is absent, along with the cerebral hemisphere of the brain. If we look at them, we can see that their head is basically flatter than the normal person. The next disease is called spina bifida, which is a birth defect that occurs when the spine and the spinal cord don't form properly. And it can range in severity. Sometimes they can walk without any aids or assistance. Sometimes they would need crutches or walkers, or even wheelchairs. But doctors can start the treatment for movement problems soon after a baby with spina bifida is born. Epilepsy, autism, and dyslexia. They can be a result of improper migration of neurons during prenatal development. Usually if the fetal is exposed to nicotine, meaning that if the mother smokes during pregnancy, it can influence the motility, neural connections, and pruning, which can eventually lead to the fetal brain damage. The last disease that we're going to look at in this presentation is called multiple sclerosis, also known as MS, which is an autoimmune disease of the nervous system. So basically what happens in multiple sclerosis is that the myelin sheath of a nerve cell is destroyed with inflammation and scarring. It usually appears during the 3rd or 4th decade of life, and symptoms can include vision loss, weakness or fatigue, cognitive problems, balance problems or diseases, and things like that. That is all for this presentation. Thank you for your time.